Okay, Vice Chairman Lewis, just to note, we don't have a quorum for tonight's meeting on Thursday, March 6th, 2025, 7 o'clock p.m. So we're not going to open the meeting or call roll call because I don't have enough members in attendance tonight to run the meeting formally. There were no action items on the agenda, just a couple of things for discussion, including the tree regulations for construction and accessory structures. And both items are just discussion only items. In there were no action items and we don't have any meeting minutes for review. However, given that we didn't have an opportunity until late about a half hour ago to know that we were not going to have a quorum. Wanted to give the opportunity, and also if anybody did log in online, that again, I can't conduct the meeting business, but we were hoping if we can have at least 30 minutes or so to kind of go over some of those changes. We'll have to have that discussion, of course, at our next meeting in there. So if that's okay, if we can kind of go over what you've gotten in the dais, what's been posted online, and then if there's any questions on that.
I think it makes sense. I think obviously we're gonna have to cover it again, so I want to make sure we're not making any substantial changes without the group, because we're gonna have to rehash it anyway. But just getting ideas and opinions, things to start thinking about makes sense.
Thank you. So the first item I'll start was we had the tree protection, preservation, and replacement. And again, our goal has been to establish some standards on how to address tree removal during construction. We first started with new single-family homes, but that's kind of expanded. So what the direction we've taken, the latest draft is identifying the process to conduct an inventory of the trees that are on site, assign them their status, somewhat like giving them the points in there, establishing protection standards. And then the third component of the ordinance would be the replacement criteria of those, and it'll be kind of based on a point system. In this case, the points are calipers that are in there. Now, the direction we've gone in this is taking consideration that you have within a property a defined buildable area by zoning, and to take that in account, that is buildable area, and trees that were planted there, whether intentionally or during the design or so, they are within a defined buildable area. And while we would like to encourage them to preserve as many as possible, we won't penalize them for their removal in there. They would have to identify the type of tree, the health of the tree, and the size of the tree in there, and we take all those into consideration. And then you have the perimeter, which we call the setback areas, the front setback, the rear setback, the side yard setbacks. Those are areas and trees where if there's existing trees, we want to minimize and limit as much disruption as possible. We assign, again, we ask them to provide the identity of the tree, size of the tree, the health of the tree, and then we assign them a specific type of point system. And then we look at where the utility trenches are. We do the exact same thing. And then they kind of overlay that information with their new development plans or addition, or if they're doing the demolition. And then we identify what we'll call it, let's say some risk zones, and then those that they should have no reason to impact whatsoever. And then we add the total amounts of calipers based on this point system, and then the criteria is for them to replace it, like for every, I'm throwing a number, for every 10 inches of diameter or caliper that is lost, you have to replace that with at least 1 inch of new tree. And the minimum size of a new tree would be 2 inches in there. So again, it's taking in consideration the trees that are within the buildable area that are going to get impacted, assign them, some type of a point system, and then takes into consideration those that are outside of the buildable area, assigns them a different point system. You total up all the points, identify how many are going to be removed, and then based on the points of those being removed, establish a criteria for the replacement. So you won't be doing a 1-to-1. We're not going to a 9-inch tree for a 9-inch tree, but you may have to replace a 9-inch tree with a two-inch tree, just depending on what the total comes out. We've applied it to a couple of properties. Most recent, I'm not going to identify because they're going through a process right now. And they're to see, do I end up with too many trees? Do I end up with too little trees? What are the spaces? And that's what we're kind of working through. And so far, it wasn't bad in total. And I'll go through an example to a house that's already under construction. It's gone through this process and show you how it's been calculated, where they would have to they'd have to put in 7 new trees in there. And then they have a flexibility that they could do 5 trees and 2 rain gardens or rainscapes of some sort. But then we still want to provide some flexibility that, again, we will come into situations where it's just too much, or, there's just not enough room or space, and create some type of criteria for the commission to consider other options. And then you have, all trees are supposed to be guaranteed, installed in certain times and escrow.
And escrow.
An escrow that we wouldn't release the house escrow until the tree is completed.
Is that the
Yeah,
normal?
right.
That's the same escrow as normal, though.
Yes,
You're just not gonna release it till the
Correct.
trees are done. Okay.
Oh, okay. So it's already standard.
It's already
policy.
Yes.
standard, yeah.
But we would continue to hold on until that is usually done. Because we have a lot of instances where a house is done, let's say in the middle of January, and, putting sod or doing landscaping just doesn't make sense. Or times like in the middle of July, we would prefer they not, do plantings at certain times.
I'm curious, just looking at the applicability, we mentioned single family homes. Is that because multifamily or apartments or things like that would be covered under a different ordinance?
That is
or-
correct.
Okay, for trees, okay.
Yeah, there's a whole set of different regulations for those.
Okay, and then also the additions and accessory structures, it mentions accessory structures. Would something like a pool follow as an accessory structure as well?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're not boxing ourselves into just, because I'm thinking of somebody like the path we had the other day, the one at 803 or 806 North Bryce. They want to put in a sidewalk and, covering for it or something like that. Even though the mother-in-law or whatever it is, the garage is not being built yet, approved, even something like that might disrupt trees would be part of it. So,
Correct.
okay. And just to call it, we're talking any additions, any new single family homes, any demolitions. It's interesting on the demolition one, because, I guess, so this would stop somebody from demoing, clearing all the trees, then selling the land, and that way the person isn't on the hook anymore.
Correct. We get some instances where we will get an application for demo and out of the blue, or we know that they're preparing plans for the plan commission.
But they don't actually have a new home yet. Maybe they just want to
Correct.
demo and sell a lot. This would stop the tree. And I like that, because otherwise somebody could demo it, say, I'll take care of that for you. I'll do the demo. It wasn't under the ordinance. New builder doesn't have anything to worry about then.
Correct.
So, okay. You mentioned, and we'll have to read through it, obviously. I think it'll be helpful to read through it before, but you mentioned like the 2 inches. Is there any regulation about what age the tree has to be when they put it in?
No, we were looking at something in 2-inch caliper or so. So I didn't do any research of whether
Okay.
that tree's been a year old or.
Well, and I guess the reason I ask is like 2 inches could turn into 10 depending on the tree, or 2 inches.
Expensive tree.
I agree. No, I agree. But, no, I'm not saying we're putting in a 10, because that's thousands of dollars. That's not
Mhm.
happening. But my point being is, if they put something that's only going to be 2 inches in the end, it's a real thin tree, I wasn't sure if we were expecting, and maybe it's based off the types we have, what types of tree. I know we're going to cover what types of trees through the Missouri Botanical Gardens and stuff, but okay. Let's think about the age, but no limitations on that.
So again, the planting of the tree would be no less than 2 inches. Now,
Mm.
it will.
What they want to do from there.
If it grow as it grows, or what type of tree, depending, would determine what that final outcome is
Okay.
as it matures. That was the other thing. Again, we also put information in there that the tree list that we would utilize is that's identified in the Missouri Botanical Gardens website. In there, we'll add some clarifications or specifics in there. We like that site because there's some pretty good pictures in there. Again, I have inspectors, building inspectors. I don't have horticulturalists or arborists or landscapers on staff. This gives them a a good idea of what they look at and just, and it narrows down how many that they need to know or be aware of in there. And then we added, I think there was some comments about making sure that they're native or they're non-invasive. They're native, but also non-invasive. We put some wording onto that too.
And I remember this was a debate too, but we talked about removal, and we're saying here, they cannot remove it within 10 years unless obviously, act of God or infection or they come before and ask for an exception.
That's correct.
And I appreciate. What about if they also want an exception to, they're like, we just can't meet these numbers. We don't want to do it.
I think that's what we'll work on next, and we'll show you how it's applied, and then we'll talk or gather some thoughts of how, I wouldn't call it an exception, but in lieu of doing the full amount, what would they do in exchange?
Yeah, because that's what I'm wondering. Someone might be like, the property doesn't sustain it, or I just don't want extra trees here because it blocks my site, or I don't want a rain garden because I want a place to play in the backyard. I don't know, whatever the answer is. Are they coming before PCDC for all those types of things, or?
I think we would, from a staff perspective, we'd prefer that they come to the commission to make that justification.
Okay.
That justification could be, and we'll talk about this further down the road, could be, to plant trees, more specific trees that either because of a cost, or be more, within the list, but they're, I'll use the term better trees because I'm not a tree expert, so they'll be putting better trees into traditional tree, or they do something in lieu in exchange to make up for that. And we'll set up some parameters for the commission. That way you guys have some window room to work within. The expectation is like, okay, so if you're not going to do this, you're going to do this, do this instead. And, these are the parameters you'll have to work with. The option to do the rainscaping or rain garden was at least one of those options, that if you couldn't do so many specific trees, you could consider the rainscape or rain garden in there. There may be like other landscaping that they can do in exchange, but we're trying to meet that same principle of either creating better coverage on the soil grounds in there, and make up for the loss, whether it's canopy or number of trees. So they may have a more elaborate landscape plan in lieu of not having to meet the full tree criteria. But I think we would need some specific standards in place. It minimizes like how much room you have in there, and it also encourages people either comply or it's one or the other.
Okay.
At this point, I don't think we're in a position to have it as a donation or to pick up the tree and put it somewhere else.
Yeah.
That might be something down the future, but I don't think at this point we're
Nope.
there yet.
As long as it's something that we're considering on what we want to do for those, makes sense. Okay.
So I'd like to ask a question, if you don't mind. The 10-year rule, okay? You're the builder. I'm the buyer. How am I as a homeowner and buyer going to know that I can't cut that tree down for 10 years? How is that going to be communicated?
We'll have to figure something out. It's just like indentures. A lot of people don't know that they have indentures, or can't put a fence or can't put a shed in there, but the rule is the rule. And if it becomes to our attention, it's something.
Well, and to that point, how is it in any of the documentation we're going to give as part of the occupancy permit or so? I don't know.
It's something we can incorporate in that process.
These trees were identified. And then I guess a question too is, someone sells the house, does that transfer?
They need to, they need to.
That expectation
inform.
transfers. Okay.
So we may have to create some type of, again, we wouldn't issue it like them an ordinance, but we'd have some type of letter.
It's lien, almost like a lien on the tree.
Yeah, and it may be something to get
Yeah.
recorded in St. Louis County.
Interesting. Okay. Just things, and these are
It is.
this
yeah,
is where the
it's
tentacles go
hard.
deep on this, and we have to think through all these things. It's not an easy, just keep your trees, so.
I am not for the 10-year. I could tell you that. I think it is a long time. I think people want to do what they want to do on their land. I think it's great that we have they have a year warranty and everything like that. But after that, I think it's up to them. I do not think we should be looking at anything. I'm like, trying to picture in my head, anything on a house that the city has to do that's warranted for 10 years, that you have to keep it like that. Maybe a driveway, but besides that, you can change your color of your paint. You could do a lot of different things. And I don't think the city should be in the business of 10 years down the road looking at something.
I also think 10 years is a long time, and I also look at it, but when we moved 4 years ago, the tree in the backyard was a Bradford pear, and it had a split in the trunk. And immediately, I was like, that tree's coming out. One, because it had a split in the trunk, and two, it was Bradford pear, and I knew as soon as we had a major storm, it was going to come down and possibly ruin my brand new flatwork patio. And I was like, that's gonna cost me more money. So it was, okay, I'm taking this tree out. I would have never thought to consult the city about taking that tree out. That just would not have crossed my mind, and I've lived in Olivet my whole life. So it would have been like, okay, I'm
In that-
I'm getting I'm getting rid of it.
Right, in that scenario, would you have to come and get a permit
Well,
for
that
that?
scenario, it listed here as any infection or any, I would argue that's damage to a tree already, but it's subjective. And so
Yeah.
it's a fair argument, you know.
Right, so what would happen?
It
in that
is a
scenario?
good question, because in that scenario, again, if we're not made aware of the condition of the tree, like let's say we didn't know or we didn't see how the tree was, but we knew, like let's say you had a new house and you had that tree and something did happen to that tree, we were not made aware. 6 months later, driving by, it's like they're supposed to have a tree back there, but you already took it out and such. It's complicated.
Right, I just.
I
think
can
that-
go to a plan to say there was supposed to be a tree here and it needs to, you have to have something there for at least 10 years. In there, but that's really the only method of catching, or the neighbor turns you in, and that's usually about 75% of the time.
Yeah, I don't see that at all. I see the escrow, I see making sure they're in and everything and making sure they have a 1-year warranty attached to it, but other than that, I think.
It just puts, and then the question would be like the balance of, I think what was brought up was that, yeah, I plant 7 trees after I constructed this home and get my occupancy and then take all 7 out. And again, that was the question. It's like, well, what happens at that point? So we looked at, okay, well, then let's say that they have to stay for a certain period. I can understand that maybe 10 years is too long, but should a 3 or 5 year period be considered, or just leave it as is?
What do other cities who have this?
We can take a look at them. I couldn't answer that right away.
Yeah,
or
I'd be
straight.
curious to know what they did. I mean, 10 does, I understand 10 feels long. My hope is people keep it. I'm open to the conversation lowering it. I do want to have some teeth in there, but 10 may be too much, you know.
The other thing to consider is people that are buying a new house aren't ripping out the trees that they're putting back in. Very few, I would say there would be a
Rare.
couple people that would do it, but for
Mhm.
the majority of people are buying that house and keeping whatever they just paid for basically to do it. I think there will be some that would do it, that would say, hey, I'm gonna please the city, I'm gonna rip it out right away, but that's few and far between.
A brand new tree in 5 years doesn't look like the tree that's been in our backyard for 35, 40, and 50 years too. So, I'm gonna just ask the question, and the 10-year rule, how are we dealing with that?
So we'll look at the timing. We'll see what I don't think in the table of communities that we put anything on that, or I looked into what those conditions were
Okay.
in there. So something we can put together. It's a good question.
Complex. Okay.
It is, it started to get there, and but it had there is some thought on it, on how it impacts construction, how it takes into consideration the bad placement of trees already in existence in there. So we did try to apply it to a property on Heather Hill. I think this is number 12 or 15, 17 in here, and it won't come out as clear. Again, we're trying to see how many trees it was going to conduct this, but this red line around here, and bear with me. Yeah. that you see here. Now, this is applying to an existing footprint, but what would happen is that you have every property that comes in for review, you have your buildable area zoning that's shown here in these dashed lines. And there you have a building footprint, and you have several improvements. And what this would do is, in consideration to the improvements that are in the buildable area, you would create like a 15-foot buffer around there and identify those trees. Anything within that 15-foot buffer that's existing is going to get impacted by the foundation. I mean, it's going to go underneath the canopy unless it's a very narrow tree or some type of pine of some sort in there. So again, we want to discourage them from impacting trees, but there are going to be trees that are going to be so close to the foundation that, you know, maintaining them is going to cost the homeowner a lot more down the road. What we would do is that we would assign them a point in there because they're within the buildable areas. We would look at the other improvements where they're going to dig holes, encourage them not to do something like around this area, or see if things can get shifted around. But those that fall within those, will assign a separate point. We'll consider whether the tree is healthy or what health is the tree. And anyway, it all adds up to a certain amount of points in there. In the end of the day, they would provide us, you know, the size, you know, like A is a 14-inch, E is a 44-inch, D is a 36-inch. Anyway, we would total the caliper or the diameter of all the trees in there. It will take into consideration their health, and it would add up to a specific number of points in there, and then we would divide that by how many would be necessary. So in this case, this property, I think we calculated would have to provide 7 trees.
And Carlos, you're thinking that the point system is weighted based on the buildable area wouldn't be as weighted as the side yard that you're taking?
That is correct.
Okay. And then is the ones that are dead that you're removing, would that have a
They're weighted
weighting
also,
too?
just like the same way, you know.
Okay, that would be a different weight.
Some decision was made not to maintain their trees, that it shouldn't penalize redevelopment on that site because a previous owner or neighbors didn't get together and help on the tree maintenance.
So, but there would be, I believe there still should be a little bit of a weight for those trees that they're taking down that are.
Yeah, it won't be a
condition.
free, you know,
Right,
like no
it wouldn't be
points in there, but they would be weighted differently than if it was a real healthy tree.
Correct, yes,
and-
okay. I agree with all that. I like that. But every tree that they're gonna take out, there's gonna be some kind of a point for that.
That is correct.
Okay,
Then in an instance like this, it would be after that, you know, there would be we would know that they had to, based on the point system, provide 7 trees. These 7 trees are 2-inch caliper trees. They can do more if they want or anything, but at a minimum, they're 2 inches. Then the question comes in, they need to submit a landscape plan. It would be up to the commission to determine, is like, okay, staff, you can handle that, because I have to make sure that it's pretty simple for me to, okay, there's 7 trees there, you know, in there, and to check the list and all that. I'm not ignoring all that. That's something I think we can handle. Or if you want them to come back to show you the 7 trees. My thought was, this is something administratively we would be comfortable to do in there to ensure that they plant the exact amount. But in situations where they want some type of leniency or have a different alternative, that then they come back to the commission with that landscape plan for review.
would any of these be part of the initial review, the design review?
Of those trees?
Yeah,
No, you would just know how many would be necessary.
okay,
But not where they're going or.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
I like all that.
Yeah, no. Do you have another example? Or
No, we did this one, we did each one, we did one, but I don't know PowerPoint wise that we have. I'll let you.
no, that's okay. But
Okay.
I think it's helpful to a tangible example is helpful. I think appreciate you guys also trying to think of all the different permutations. We'll think of it as well. I think it's important not to make you be an arborist or make anyone. And again, at the end of the day, somebody could put these 7 trees in. Did they remove 2 of them unless a neighbor knew, unless anyone knew? I mean, are we ever gonna hear about it, right? Probably not, but I think but it doesn't mean we shouldn't attempt to try to do these things, so.
And again, I look at it, I strongly believe, based because of our comprehensive plan, it's a long range plan, that we are going to revisit trees, and that might be in a mid range or a long range overhaul of how we regulate trees. This is solely about during the construction process and what's coming to the commission and how
And you may have covered this, but what happens like whether it's 10 years or 3 years if someone does remove one of those, and then the escrow's been paid, it's year 2, they do chop them all down. What's the repercussion?
right now, what I've gotten from the commission is there isn't in
Oh.
there. I think,
Well, they're
I thought at first what the commission was saying, 10 years is too long.
Well,
So
but
I
even if
th-
it's 1 year, like I'm just curious, we need to, and I hate to say it, there has to be some, whatever the answer
I
is.
think a 3 to 5 year would be
No, I'm not even worried about the number of
Okay.
years, but let's say it's 3 years, but
Mhm.
at year and a half, they cut down all the trees. What is the repercussions for them? What's
to
the
be able to go back to that the approval was based that they need to plant those trees back.
And
Now, they may plant them in a different
how,
location and
how do we enforce that? I guess, what is the enforcement penalty on them? Like,
it would be, yeah,
and I don't
It's a
know
good
you'd have to
question.
have an answer now, but those are the things,
no, good
because
question.
if they can't, we find out they did it and we're like, but we're toothless now. So,
And I'd like to know the lawyer's position
Yeah.
because my brain's all law and it's like, I can see somebody suing the city for this.
For sure.
And yeah, and the city losing, that's
Well,
just.
I
who
think
knows,
that
yeah.
has to run by the lawyer, yeah. Okay.
I don't know what the city pay for legal fees, it doesn't pay for.
Should we? Next steps, move on.
So as you said,
Do we want to take any?
that
Can
would
we?
be up to you. I
Can
think
we? I'm comfortable taking, I mean, people showed up, I think, and they came for this specific topic, so I think it's nice to take public comments. So. I don't even know if I'm allowed to recognize anyone, so, yeah. Come on. Yeah. We haven't gavelled in, so. Give me a microphone, please.
Stephanie Todd, 7 Heather Hill Lane. I don't think I read the latest draft because I didn't see any point system, because I have 2 main things, the replacement criteria and the focus on preserving trees. So the way I read it, it said that all the trees that are cut down, you're gonna measure the diameter at whatever, at chest level, and then essentially divide by 20, and that's how many trees you put up. And I was thinking I was suggesting that any tree less than 20 inches, you replace it with a 2-inch tree, because the way I read it, and it sounds like I might not have the current thing, there could be a row of 10 2-inch trees, the builder cuts them all down and he replaces them with one, or you could have, so that's the way I read the ordinance, that's what you could do. Or you could have 4 10-inch trees that aren't that big, and then you could cut down 4 trees and that are 10 inches each and then replace it with 2, and so I think there should be a cutoff that if they're I think dividing by 20 is too big. You're hardly going to be replacing any trees. I think there should be some differentiation there between 1 for 1 and then, because I know, if it's a big tree like this, you're not gonna, okay, then it would probably measure that you'd probably replace it with 3 trees or something.
I wonder if we don't have the recent one, maybe it got published, it might be worth waiting and revisiting that. We're gonna have to discuss this again in the near future.
Well, that's what it
the
says.
comments is the one I got from you.
So I guess I did read the last one.
Mhm.
I did read the latest. So that doesn't look like a point system. It looks like you take the total and then just divide by 20. So,
That total being the point number. And that's,
right.
So
But so my point is you could cut down 10 2-inch trees and replace them with 1 2-inch.
But how many points is a 2-inch tree worth?
it's not the,
It's not the diameter.
not the same.
That's
We're
fine.
talking.
Yes, no, there is no points per tree. What you're doing, you're totaling up the diameter of all the trees you cut down and then divide by 20, and that's how many trees you put in.
Just in the buildable area, but in the yard area and the utility zones have different,
Okay,
Calculated.
then
Right.
you divide by 15.
right?
So the intent is that I see what you're saying and I understand, but they are weighted differently throughout the code. So there are
See-
the ones that probably shouldn't have been planted where they were at are not going to have the same weight as the ones that you really should not be disturbed.
Well, and again,
So-
so the buildable area to me is confusing because isn't the buildable area is just whatever offset it has. And so like our house, it's the buildable area is like what, 3 feet or 5 feet from the property line. So they're not, so again, it's tough if no one submitted a plan yet, but to me, I would just forget buildable area and you're cutting down a tree, you're cutting down a tree,
I think
replace
what I've
it.
gotten from the commission is different. I appreciate your opinion, but again, the direction we're going is that the buildable area is treated differently than the perimeter. Because the zoning has guaranteed that you have the right as a property owner to make improvements within that buildable area.
Okay,
Now,
But
if you remove a healthy tree, I think you should be weighted to replace that healthy tree in the buildable area, but I'm not going to weight it as much as those that were properly planted.
but see, this has no weight for that. It says you just measure everything by 20 inch, you just measure everything and divide by 20. And that's what I'm saying, I think needs a
I'll
little.
take a look into it, but it does define the different trees and then,
And I
And
think
it-
that's part of the conversation we need to have is 20 too little, too much, and so I think that's a fair point we can take back and look
And
at.
they're all replaced with 2 inches, which that's a fine, that's a nice sized tree.
Yeah,
But
understood.
see what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
No, understood. I think
Yeah.
but that's the whole point of this is to kind of look at it. And so I think maybe, as an assessment, maybe if you looked at another model, what would 20 versus 15 versus 10 mean? And because sometimes it gets out of hand if someone has to replace with 34 trees, we're like, well, now that's not going to happen.
I
So-
know, I
So
know,
it's a balance and there's no perfect answer, but we're trying to find the right answer.
I
So,
know.
Okay.
I just thought I'd bring that up. And
Appreciate it.
Yep.
The other thing, it seems like the whole thing is the way it's worded, it's like, it seems like you're assuming you're gonna cut down all these trees instead of, I don't see anything like encouraging trees. And all the requirements are wishy-washy, like the protection area. It says you have to have the protection area, but if you have to go in it, well, then you have to do that. It's like, if you're gonna make a rule, make a rule. And if they have to violate it, then they have to come back or something. There's too many things in there that says, well, this is the rule, but try to do it. So it's like, if you're gonna have a requirement, have a requirement.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Kate Pashon Hellman, 800 North Price. My comments are kind of a little bit of idea questioning and then also just some like specific logistic sorts of things. On page 1, I think it would be good under the definitions to either include yard area or setback area to have that defined, as well as the tree protection zone. There very well may be other things that could benefit from definitions, but I think those are the two that I didn't see under definitions that I think would be helpful. And then I found it a little bit confusing in the wording, trying to distinguish between whether significant trees were 6 inches or 8 inches. So I think that's just kind of establishing what the measurement is that it is supposed to be for significant trees. And then I think it's just a consistency throughout the
And
document.
The way I read it is within a buildable area, it's 8 inches, within a yard area, it's 6 inch. But I'm correct.
yeah.
Okay. Buildable areas, significant, yard areas, non-significant. Okay.
Okay. And then kind of along that lines, I also felt as I was reading through it that there were a few times that I encountered some contradictory or unclear statements about whether a tree could be removed that's 6 inches or less without replacing. So for example, page 2, D2, it says trees not identified as significant trees are in poor health or have DBH less than 8 inches may be removed without replacement. But then it says non-significant trees in fair condition or good health will require replacement. So to me, those two sentences, it's, I think just a little bit more clarity in the language would be helpful, because that to me, as I read through it, and there were a couple other examples of that where I had a hard time really trying to understand what was being said. And then regarding the tree replacement standards that are on, that were just, or they're still on the screen there. Knowing the background of that more helps me with this, but my first thought was like, should this be simplified somehow of just finding the happy medium? Whether it's maybe 10 inches or 15 inches instead of having the 3 different zones. But I guess that's really a question for the planning and zoning staff, and how much labor and time it takes to run all of those calculations. And then the idea, I saw in Town and Country's tree ordinance that they have, when a tree cannot be replaced for whatever the reason is, not just that I don't want to replace a tree, but if there's a significant reason why it can't be replaced for some reason, that they do a donation to the city's tree fund, which is a $30 per cross-sectional inch of the required replacement. Now, I think that's very confusing. They have a whole chart in their ordinance, but just thinking, what about that as an idea that maybe if there's a limiting circumstance where a tree can't be replaced, if we could think about creating a city tree fund, and maybe it's, $100 for every 10 inches that are lost.
Yeah, we've brought that one up before for sure. I think there was concerns around the management of it, but it was definitely an idea considered as well. So
So, the conversation is had and the city manager is very uncomfortable with getting into that format. And with regard to the insignificant trees, the way I read the language is, if you're killing a good tree, you have to replace it. You shouldn't be penalized for if it's a bad dead tree, then you shouldn't have to replace it. And for me, that's common sense. But I also hear what you're saying about a clear definition of what should or shouldn't. But, my interpretation of what you read was, I understand this. You take away that good tree, you have to replace it. You're getting rid of the dead tree or a bad tree, you're not penalized, you don't need to replace it. But the conversation is, no, the city is not in the tree business. The city is not interested in an escrow account for replacement of trees. Having said that, future council members can clearly have that conversation and clearly have that discussion with the city manager and the staff. But right now, the thought is, we're not in the tree business.
Thank you.
thank you.
No, Ms. Todd and Ms. McCon both gave me some information,
Yeah.
their emails to take. a
And
look at.
and I imagine we're gonna,
So we'll-
anything we do would be run by legal. They would look at it, make sure the
Absolutely.
language wasn't ambiguous or contradictory. Then council would have to vote on this as well, correct? Okay,
Yes.
all right.
You recommend.
Yeah,
they
I'm
recommend,
saying
right,
eventually
right,
they get
yes.
final approval. Okay. All right. When we move on.
Then real quickly, we started to put into in a word process, the accessory structure. It does need structures and uses. And this is the thing about, these type of ordinances, that they're always evolving. They're organic and they change over time. We've had some issues with some of the wording that we have here in there and how it's applied for stormwater and some of the coverage things. So, given that we were having some discussions about heights and some other items, it was a good opportunity to now look at the accessory structures and uses and do an overhaul. we'll go through all the wording and such, but what we would like to add, and all we're doing here is just keeping the format. It was not specific things, but add requirements or regulations for solar panels. We have some informal criteria, whether it has to come to the commission or not. We'd like to get that in writing in there.
The commission should have the updated one.
Okay. Requirements for generators. We got a lot of people, asking how close I can get that to a property line. And then compressors, such as air conditioners and things of that
Are we,
nature.
hold on, I'm sorry, Carlos, are we talking about these right now? Is that what we're doing right now?
Giving
Okay.
you information, we will be talking about these, but I would not pay attention to the language here. That was just cut and paste so we can keep the
Ah,
format.
But we're not putting solar panels in the front yard.
Well, that's going to be one of the questions of at what point does that come in? Now, not on the yard, but we have allowed on the rooftop.
This was copy paste, I think, right? So
Yes.
Where it says front yard might have been from something else.
Correct.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay,
Yeah,
that's all I want
It
to
is
make
just
sure that we're
about
not.
the number here. But we wanted to
I hope
maintain the
so.
same type of formatting that was in there.
Okay.
So those would be about structures, again, looking, and if there's anything else the commission would like us to consider, but adding some written requirements for, again, the compressors, the generators, and the solar panels. And then doing some tweaking on some of the language regarding accessory structures. On accessory uses, we know we've talked about adding short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units. So start tackling those and coming back with this, and then overhauling the whole chapter, or excuse me, the article.
So what's in red?
We're
So
gonna,
what's in red, you're asking the panel down the road we're gonna begin to have these discussions. This is gonna end up in this document, so we're putting the placeholders in there for basically the structure and the outline. And conversation and and recommendations will be done by y'all
Okay.
down the road.
thank you.
Will this cover as well, do you think, the concept of Airbnb?
That would be the short-term rental.
Okay,
That would
I
be
wasn't sure if that's what you
addressing
meant
that.
by short-term rentals. It's kind of a,
It's two different things.
that's why I think of short-term rentals as in, I'm renting as someone for 90 days or something like that, like a summer, versus an Airbnb is a kind of a unique concept. But as long as we cover the language in there,
It
then that's
falls,
fine.
yeah, in the planning world in definition, it falls under that umbrella, and it could be
Okay.
called out more specific. Airbnb being more of it's like, can I get a Kleenex?
Yeah, you don't want to call it
Tissue.
Airbnb because it could be VRBO, it could be whatever it is. But I think to your point, it's anytime you are renting out for money that area.
Yeah, and within a shorter period than you would a traditional lease.
Because,
So-
well, but and again, this is where the legal gets into it. But technically, as an owner, I'm maybe not renting it out. I'm renting it out to a company like Airbnb, who's a transaction. So it's kind of I know it's
Yeah,
it's the gray area. We don't want someone getting around that way. So okay,
It's the other. It's the other.
yeah, that's fair.
So that's all we have. We didn't have any meeting as well. We can't take any actions anyway, so.
Okay. Staff reports? Do we get any staff reports?
Any specific updates, not that I'm aware of. In there's any questions. I mean, we've been keeping an eye at Great Heart Brewery to see how the parking.
Yeah,
We
I
kind of
went
know.
one. It was packed when
Yeah.
I went. It
How,
was,
how is the parking
I
going?
mean,
there?
we haven't had any recorded police reports,
Okay.
but we've gotten a lot of calls,
Okay.
out there that, yeah, if you go on at certain times, it is busy. And the UPS store has, of course, informed us, and they're out there trying to mitigate what they can. And I'd like to give it some time to see how it evolves. I think right now it's shiny in you, and it is going to be busy, just like the Aldis. It is, but this is a different situation, of course, but we're keeping tabs on it, and that's why we restricted the hours. I mean, there was a discussion that, like they'd love to serve lunch, but they understand it's just too busy. So that's why they open up at 4, except for Saturday and Sunday.
Good problem.
Yeah, it's great, but it becomes a problem when it's obstructing Olive, and then I think, then it's our problem. Parking within the lot, no different if you go to lunchtime to the shops at Price Crossing. You're gonna have a tough time if you wait too long.
Well, I mean, but let's say it becomes a problem and it's backing up an Olive. What do we do about that?
Then we have the authority within our special permit. I mean, the worst case scenario is like we can enforce and pull the permit.
Oh,
I think they've done a major investment.
Yeah, I
that we
know.
would see what we can work.
So
other
assuming we don't want to do
alternatives.
that, like, I'm just curious how we could,
You know, I know they have an agreement with the bowling alley, you know, and maybe
okay,
they
so
need to do
signs
more.
pointing them there or something like that, maybe build a pass through with the talk to Plan
Correct.
Haven or something, yeah.
But it's a hard site, and we knew it was going to be. We didn't know exactly what the final anchor was going to be, and we were excited about having this anchor in there. But see how it works and how it settles in. It's got to give it some time before.
Oh, yeah, yeah, it's
making a
too
full
early.
assessment.
That makes sense. Missy,
So,
anything from you? Oh, sorry.
We have coffee with the mayor next week on Wednesday. I've invited my cohort at University City along with the planning component manager with the Missouri Department of Transportation in the St. Louis region to kind of talk about visions, you know, our corridor vision. And there, so and that's on Wednesday at 8:45. Yes. And so, and then I, a lot of people like to know what's going on or what are the final tenants next door. So it should be pretty interesting. That's out of that.
I think we're gonna have to revisit it. I would suggest maybe sending notes to Carlos and Jack, and then, I mean, because we're gonna have to bring it to the whole panel. We're not voting on anything right now. Is that something you could just send to them?
But I'm really glad. I was just gonna make a general comment that I don't think that you should allow, story, accessory, um, buildings in the backyard, or, they should be limited to like 15 feet or something, because, I started looking around, it's like, shoot, we could do that in our backyard, and all these people could, so I think, that last, petitioner that came out, you could really be setting a precedent if you let someone build this huge, accessory structure in their backyard. It really cause havoc in the city.
Yeah, let's hold it. I think the language isn't even finalized yet, but I think it's something to bring up for sure on the next one. So, okay,
General discussion, I didn't even.
appreciate it.
that-
Yep.
That would be good to look at an ordinance to do things, not something like that.
Missy?
All right, Carlos, explain what we're gonna do with Coffee with the Mayor. That's gonna be an exciting thing. Tomorrow night, I will be attending the Creve Coeur Olivet Chamber. It is the recognition and honoring of the firemen and the policemen of the year for the city of Olivet and the city of Creve Coeur and St. Louis County. And so that's gonna be an exciting event. We have an election coming up in the beginning of April, and that's pretty much it.
Excellent. All right. I'm not gabbling, so. Yeah.
Awesome.
Don't forget, so we don't have a meeting next on the 20th because of the spring break.
Yep.
And there's, so I believe April 6th is our first meeting. April 3rd. All right.
Okay, and I know, sorry, vote, nominate your favorite restaurants, businesses. I hope that you all have. We've gotten a lot of good feedback so far. So thank you very much.
That includes our audience area and any of the people that, encourage them. I mean, a lot of these businesses are local mom and pops and they represent Olivet well. So if through your associations or other groups, encourage them to vote.
We also need people to run for commissions. So to our large audience, please, please tell your friends. Yes.
Thank you, sir.